Good morning. Welcome. My name is Michael O'Mealy, and I'm with a USAID-funded activity called Climate Economic Analysis for Development, Investment, and Resilience, or CEDAR, which organized today's event in collaboration with another USAID-funded activity called Sharing Environment and Energy Knowledge, or SEEK. And it is wonderful to see everyone here today, and thank you all for joining us in this exciting forum to discuss opportunities for U.S. smart grid, mini grid, and energy storage suppliers and investors in emerging markets in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. In addition to all of us here in the room, I would also like to welcome our online participants who are joining us today through a live streaming global webinar. We have more than 70 people joining us from 30 countries around the world. And for all of you on the webinar, we look forward to inviting your questions and comments during our discussion period today via the webinar platform that is being moderated by our CEDAR Communications Manager, Leah Quinn. We have an impressive lineup of speakers and networking sessions for you today that will explore the emerging markets in Africa, Asia, and Latin America for U.S. firms and investors, examine business models to overcome barriers for expanding sales in these markets, discuss strategies and opportunities for accessing finance and connecting with partners, and facilitating networking with many of these partners and industry leaders engaged in these markets. Before we dive in, I would like to thank our generous media partner for today's event, Bloomberg New Energy Finance. And I'd also like to thank the U.S. government agencies that collaborated with USAID and CEDAR in planning this event, including the U.S. Department of Commerce, International Trade Administration, the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, and Power Africa. Today's forum is our third CEDAR event focused on emerging markets for U.S. suppliers and investors in developing countries, which over the past year have also included a full-day forum held in Denver, Colorado last May, focused on renewable energy and smart grid markets. This not working, lost it. Grab it, one of these, okay. You know, it's like every time we do an event, like AV is my biggest nightmare. Like I literally get 3 hours of sleep the night before an event because of AV, audiovisual. You just never know, it's like a black hole. Okay, so again, our events over the last year included a forum we held in Denver, Colorado last May, and also a webinar that we held last week on opportunities for U.S. smart grid suppliers, specifically in Africa. And resources from these and other CEDAR events and activities are available on the USAID Climate Links webpage, which is shown here on the screen. And with that, it is my true pleasure to now introduce Matt Oganowski from USAID's Bureau for Economic Growth, Education, and Environment to provide some opening remarks. Matt serves as USAID's Clean Energy Lead for the CEDAR project, and he also manages USAID's engagement with the Private Financing Advisory Network, or PFAN, which is an international public-private partnership that supports innovative renewable energy projects by bridging the gap between investors and developers. In addition, Matt leads international initiatives on grid flexibility and smart grids, and he brings more than 15 years of experience in project management, policy design, and economic analysis focused on energy efficiency, renewables, and distributed energy resources in the electric power, industrial, and commercial sectors. Matt, thank you so much for your leadership and for joining us here today. Yeah, can you hold this for a second? All right. Right there. Yep.
Okay. Can you all hear me? Yeah, great. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Emerging Markets for U.S. Smart Grid Suppliers and Investors in Africa, Asia, and Latin America workshop, funded by the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. I'm Matthew Oganowski, as Michael introduced me. I work on clean energy in the USAID Washington Economic Growth, Education, and Environment Bureau, E3. I want to second Michael's thank yous, beginning thanking you all for your participation today. USAID is grateful to the speakers, panelists, and moderators who have volunteered their time and travel costs to share their insights, and also to those out in the field, on the phone, and joining us from other countries. Also thanking our implementing partners, USAID-funded CEDAR activity, Crown Agents USA and APT Associates, and the SEEK activity implemented by Training Resources Group, TRG. Our media sponsor, Bloomberg NEF, and Dr. Eric Hyman. He serves as the Contracting Officers Representative and Activity Manager for CEDAR in USAID E3's Economic Policy Office. I also thank our U.S. government partners, Michael mentioned, who have assisted us in planning this event. Your help and support is appreciated. So I want to begin with a brief introduction about some new directions at USAID, transformation and the journey to self-reliance. So on the screen I have the vision for transformation from our administrator, Mark Green, and it says that, again, each of USAID's programs should look forward to the day when foreign assistance is no longer necessary. Each country must lead its own development journey by financing and implementing solutions to its own development challenges. Transformation. In the transformation process to achieve this vision, USAID will position four key areas to effectively advance national security and support host country partners on their journey to self-reliance. The first is strengthening the workforce, and then structural changes to create for field-oriented, functionally aligned, and responsive agency. USAID will prioritize programs that incentivize reform, strengthen its in-country capacity, and other objectives. And the fourth is processes will be field-driven, outcome-focused, and data-informed. So those are the four key elements, and you can find more information about the, more details on each of these elements, both at these links shown on the screen. First for transformation, and the second for the journey for self-reliance. So next I want to say a few words about USAID's energy assistance. Our guiding principles are universal access to affordable and reliable energy and open competitive markets that promote efficiency and energy security, not only for the United States, but around the globe. The United States works closely with other countries to help them deploy renewable and other clean energy solutions and to gain access to and use fossil fuels more cleanly and efficiently. Energy programs funded by USAID engage developing countries towards improving energy markets and environmental protection. This helps put these countries on a pathway to self-reliance by increasing access to affordable modern energy services, creating economic opportunity, and furthering energy independence. Another point I want to stress is that this event continues USAID's active ongoing engagement with the private sector, which is fundamental to our approach to development. USAID partners with the private sector in the United States and developing countries to develop capacity and leverage public and private financing. My U.S. government colleagues will highlight some of these partnerships and the roles of Power Africa, Commerce Department, International Trade Administration, USTDA, and OPIC. So the purpose of this workshop is to highlight opportunities in Africa, Asia, and Latin America for U.S. companies that provide smart grid products. And we're privileged here to host respected sector, industry, and government experts who will offer their insights on current regional and country trends, potential barriers and opportunities, and finance and investment strategies for smart grids. Now, to set the scene, I'd like to share a few high-level thoughts about smart grids. First, what is a smart grid? There's a really, I think, handy definition that Vicki Gunderson's team at Commerce ITA, and you'll hear from her a little later, but she has put this definition together in their top markets for smart grids report. And it basically, this, I think, encapsulates many of the key elements of smart grids. But, you know, the key thing that, things that we look at when we're talking about smart grids, they combine many heterogeneous components and processes of different kinds, some of which I've listed here. Probably the two biggest pieces are they're bidirectional, so they're receiving information as well as, you know, from both sides, and that's particularly important for areas like behind the meter systems, for example, and we're going to talk a little more about this shortly. Compared to the traditional grid, you have a larger number of proactive players and sectors. You know, new areas like transportation through electric vehicles and behind the meter systems can participate in an active way, demand response, et cetera, that they couldn't before. And there is the fundamental role of information technologies. And that not only includes advanced systems like SCADA, but also increasingly things like smart cities and the Internet of Things. Let's just a quick look at a nice little graphic that shows the view of the smart grid. And I just put it here for information purposes, but I mean, the key thing is, again, it shows some of the elements I mentioned: IT systems, central plus distributed generation. And I guess maybe the most important for that is the smart metering or advanced metering infrastructure, which I'll talk about in a moment. Sorry, I'll try to stay close to the mic. Looking at smart grids, current and future, currently the International Energy Agency estimates there's about $8 billion in smart distribution networks worldwide. That's about evenly split between China and the other countries. And looking forward, there's a rapid growth projected in smart grids, which is key to what we're going to be talking about here in terms of opportunities. And many of these factors, of course, are typical of emerging markets, and you're familiar with them. But I just want to stress that these are not only factors contributing to growth in smart grids, but again, they're also for achieving key development objectives, high GDP growth rates, along with increases in electricity demand, expanding rural energy access and electrification, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where much of the energy access remains, and also island countries, another key area where this will be a factor for smart grids. Also want to emphasize transmission and distribution losses. Addressing those has already been a key motivator for implementing smart meters, in particular in emerging markets, and you'll hear more about that. And renewable energy targets, again, I'll say more in a moment, but the countries that have aggressive renewable energy targets are also looking to smart grids to achieve them. And then finally, declines in prices and improvements in performance of the components themselves. So just put some data here for you in terms of projected growth in smart meters. There was a recent study from Northeast Group, and they found that they projected that from the 2017 level, about 40 million in 50 emerging markets countries studied, that in 5 years that would expand fivefold to about 450 million smart meters, with over 70 billion in smart grid infrastructure investments. And I also found, not surprisingly, that as the smart meters are growing, the prices are also decreasing. So that's there's going to be, there's already been significant growth. It's going to be significantly more. And equally impressive, in another recent study, found that in the next 12 years, by 2030, just looking at sub-Saharan Africa, you'll see nearly a tenfold expansion of smart meters in sub-Saharan Africa, to over 5 million by 2030. So again, very impressive growth that we're seeing. Now, going back to Vicki Gunderson's team, the report that they put together on smart grids at the Department of Commerce, I pulled out some information here that's very relevant in terms of they summarize the opportunities for U.S. suppliers. They rank different categories for smart grids for U.S. firms, and then they put that together to come up with an overall ranking. And so these are the summary for the 2018 report, which was just released, and you'll see the link to that shortly. But the key things that you can see here in terms of opportunities for U.S. suppliers are, in terms of the overall ranking of opportunities, 5 of the 10 are in emerging markets. In 4 of those 5 are in Asia, not surprisingly, where there's already been a lot of growth in this area. And the study found that, again, markets that have high renewable energy deployment targets tend to rank higher, again, showing a strong linkage between achieving renewable energy targets and using smart grids to achieve that. And the other key thing to see here for emerging markets is that in the markets specifically for transmission and distribution equipment, 9 of the 10 markets, of the 10 top markets, are in emerging economies. So in transmission and distribution, significant opportunities there. Here I put together just a high-level overview of the some of the challenges. I'm not going to go through these in detail because any of them will be familiar. I just want to point out that some of these are things you see across the board with clean energy, such as high capital expenditures, getting access to finance. But then some of these are also really particular to smart grids. The complexity of unbundled systems, for example, can be a challenge in many countries. Integrating them into existing grid infrastructure, which was from earlier. The interoperability of equipment, the need for national standards. That was something we heard for those of you who passionate or attended the Denver event. One of the things we heard from ITRON, for example, is that in Latin America and Africa, depending on where the country is located, some use European standards and some use more American standards. So that's another key thing. And of course, things like policies and regulations and local content requirements. Many countries tend to favor their own firms, so that's an important one as well. And just wrapping up shortly, I've given you an overview now again of what are the opportunities, what are some of the challenges. So what's to do? Well, the private sector, of course, has a key role to play, and that's what we're here to explore today. And I want to talk a little bit about the role of the U.S. government in helping facilitate partnerships with the private sector and smart grids, in particular with a focus on some of the work we've done with the company Spark Meter, who is here with us today as well. Spark Meter provides smart metering solutions for both mini grids and central grids globally. They were founded in 2013. They're based here in Washington, and they have an office in Nairobi. And the first thing I want to highlight, Power Africa has given them a $500,000 grant for rural smart grid installations. That was with Shell Foundation and UK DFID. And it's since 2015, they've secured 10 times that amount and almost $6 million in investment. And they've installed, with the support, in concert with the support, they've been able to install 43,000 meters in 22 countries. So it's been very successful. We also have our Development Innovation Ventures program funded Spark Meter with a grant, and that was for central grid, and that was to help utilities to improve payment systems, control systems, collect data remotely. And then the U.S. Trade and Development Agency has given them a $560,000 grant for pilot installation, and that was for smart meters at the Port Harcourt Electricity Distribution Company in Nigeria. And for those of you who patched into the Africa webinar we had through CEDAR the other day, David Raposo from USTDA gave us a nice reflection on how this project has helped the utility there to significantly increase collection and revenues. So I just wanted to give you that high-level overview, and in closing, I want to say that we hope that this workshop will be helpful in informing U.S. smart grid companies about opportunities. We're confident also that the work we begin here today will be a benefit to utilities and governments in these countries for grid modernization and for effectively integrating renewable energy sources. I've included in the deck a couple of slides here. This slide are the a snapshot of our U.S. government resources from different agencies, and hopefully that will be helpful. Also, a link to that stock markets report. And I also want to note that for press inquiries for our colleagues from the press, please feel free to contact our Office of Press Relations, which is press@usaid.gov. And with that, I want to thank you all for your active contribution today, and we wish you a productive event.
Thanks so much, Matt, for that excellent overview and of smart grid market opportunities and U.S. government support in this sector. So with that, it is my true pleasure to now invite to the podium our featured speaker in our opening session, Ethan Zindler, who will present the latest market trends for U.S. smart grid suppliers and investors in developing countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Ethan serves as the head of U.S. research at Bloomberg New Energy Finance, overseeing a team of leading analysts, researchers, and news writers in the Americas covering clean energy market development. Ethan also edits and writes notes on industry trends, and he is a regular featured speaker at global and regional conferences and in the media. Ethan, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to your insights.
Thank you. And good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me, and sorry for making a last-minute arrival. Thanks to the wonders of the Washington Metro system. I cut about as close as you could this morning. So first, thanks. I don't know if you can hear me. It's on, but no light. Let me just try this.
Test.
Great. So thank you, first of all, to Michael and to the folks at USAID for hosting me today. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, cool. Still can't hear me in the back. Okay. I'll speak loudly, maybe? Okay. This is annoying, so I'm going to do it. Hi, everyone. I'm Ethan Zindler with Bloomberg NEF. What we do is we provide market research on the clean energy markets around the world. There's about 150 or 175 analysts, about 200 developers globally. As was mentioned, I had our group in the Americas, but I do a fair amount of work on developing market stuff for a project we call Climate Scope. The areas that we focus on as a division of Bloomberg, obviously most of you have heard of what Bloomberg is, but we're a division that just focuses on what we consider sort of the circular economy and different types of industries. We started our life as a research firm focused just on clean energy. That's the stuff you see in the top right, and that's really what I'm going to talk about today. We have teams that focus on what we call decentralized energy and what we call frontier power. They're the real experts. Those are the folks who are much more in the trenches than I am. I'm going to do my best today to sort of talk about their research to all of you and hopefully articulate it as best as I can. So what I'm going to cover is really a couple things. First, a little bit of just global clean energy context in terms of investment, cost, dynamics, and generally as a bit of a scene setter. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about energy access and the trends that we see in that direction, because I think that's very much tied up in thinking about the opportunities around smart grid and smart meter deployment. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about our smart meter forecast going forward. So first, just as a start, to a little bit of context, we as a firm track investment in clean energy overall, and within the clean energy rubric overall, we include what we consider smart meter investment or smart grid investment. There's about $300 billion in new capital going into these areas every year. Most of it, I would argue, is for wind and solar, but about $20 billion of it recently per year has been into what we would consider smart grid investment. All told, about $3 trillion to date. On the right-hand side, you can simply see how many gigawatts of capacity has been added over that time. The main reason why the chart on the right goes up while the one is flat is because of the charts I'm about to show you, which is how we've seen the cost of per unit cost for clean energy come down so substantially. Namely, this is just one of the many ways you can look at costs. But if you want to look at the levelized cost of wind and solar, you can see how much of a decline that we've seen. I've been doing this probably about 13 years now. I can remember not that long ago when a solar module cost something like $4 or $5 per watt at the factory gate. We finished last year by our survey that we do every month. We ended last year about 23 cents a watt for a standard Chinese-made PV module, we think that trend continues. Even in the next 5 years, we think we'll get down to about 14, 15 cents a watt. I'm focusing particularly on PV because of its many applications on a distributed basis and its implications, of course, for microgrids. We are getting to the point where I would argue that PV is becoming really and truly commoditized. You will certainly hear from different equipment makers about differences in quality, but generally speaking, it's a race to the bottom now on cost. The equipment is getting so cheap that replacing it is not nearly as big a deal. And in fact, this is just a look from us and also from Berkeley, the Global Lighting Alliance, of the cost of a typical, very small PV solar home system. So just a 35-watt system. The typical cost was $175 back in 2014, and you can see how that's already dropped. But maybe more importantly than the overall cost, is that you can see that the hardware costs, the blue chunks at the bottom, are accounting for less and less of the overall cost of the system. And that's because obviously the equipment costs are declining. It also, in my mind, puts pressure on that purple chunk and thinking about how we can reduce those costs overall. And that's a global comment. That really is within the context of developed countries, of course, where we have to reduce the cost of residential PV, but also developing countries where you want to reduce the cost of distributed systems, but better. I would say that we're starting to see sort of the same movie when it comes to lithium-ion batteries. We've also seen an 85% price decline in the cost of a typical battery pack since 2010. This is a survey that we do every 6 months, and you can see just how much things are coming down. I would love to say this has become because of some sort of glorious technological breakthrough, and there's all kinds of investment going in around batteries, but actually really the main driver here is just economies of scale. And that's the same thing really with PV as well. Bigger factories, larger scale, more automation of the manufacturing, and that's what's really been driving it. So going forward, we expect continued declines. As you saw earlier, we could really, with PV, we can map a learning curve rate of about 28%. So for each cumulative installed capacity of PV, the price tends to drop about 28% historically. Obviously, the more cumulative capacity you get to, we're somewhere like 500 gigawatts of installed capacity now, it gets harder to double it, and it gets harder to drive costs down. But nonetheless, we're going to see that same kind of trend with lithium-ion batteries as well going forward. And this has all kinds of interesting ramifications, I would argue, obviously, for electric vehicles. And in fact, we would argue that really batteries used, either behind the meter, on microgrids and elsewhere, is really secondary in terms of how batteries are going to be used with cars. So the faster the car market picks up for electric vehicles, the faster the price of these batteries is going to come down. But basically, everybody in the power sector is kind of riding along, so to speak, in terms of hoping that the prices come down. It'll really be cars that drive the prices down. The other thing, just as a very quick note, and this isn't our research, but this is from the Global Lighting Alliance. From the LEAF Alliance, excuse me. Is that basically consumers have the potential to use a lot less energy. And we're seeing the development of new appliances, new equipment that simply is much more energy efficient. Obviously, everyone who's a Western country, here in the US, about Energy Star, etc. But if you look in the developing country context, more of these devices that are being made available. This is one estimate really from just a couple of years ago. And I'm sure you probably know about even more progress, and maybe developing products that can show more progress than this. It's just a look at an 85-liter fridge, a 12-inch table fan, or a 19-inch TV, and you can see how much the costs have already have been coming down or projected to come down into next year as well. And the reason, of course, I raise this is because one basic point, which is as we think about the energy access challenge, and we think about it sort of purely economically, the question, of course, is for state-run grids and state utilities is, if I'm going to build that next and last mile out to that consumer, how good a consumer are they going to be? In other words, how much of my product are they going to actually buy? And does it then make sense for me to build that last 10, 20 miles of grid out to that consumer? And the answer increasingly over time is going to become no, because the consumer just simply doesn't pay that much. And of course, that raises the opportunity for microgrids and for distributed solar and other things. But the reality of it is, as we get more efficient, consumers become less appealing potentially to utilities. To shift gears just slightly, I just wanted to point out that we have reached, in various ways and shapes and forms, a point where we've gotten to cost competitiveness for renewables in developing markets. This is just one example, one that we're very keenly trying to keep an eye on, which is the growth of commercial and industrial solar in sub-Saharan Africa. We simply, this is a very basic chart, we simply looked at what are the tariffs in different countries in that region, and then what we estimate as the levelized cost of electricity or energy, in those countries, which is the yellow going across. And so basically, in a bunch of countries already, you would put PV on the roof of your bodega or your small store, whatever it is, to power your operations because it's more economic. Now, there are other motivations as well, right? Maybe the grid's not great and whatever, but already, you don't want to rely on your diesel backup, whatever it is. But just purely on economics, we're there in a number of countries. And last year, we saw a record amount of C&I PV in the sub-Saharan African context, so we expect to see a good deal more going forward. All right, so I'm going to shift gears a little bit just for a second here today. Again, this is based off work that our team, or folks who are more specialized in this stuff than I am, are in terms of thinking about energy access issues. And I raised the energy access question within the context of distribution and smart grids because, well, first of all, I'm sort of stealing my own punchline, but I'm going to get there eventually, is that most of eventually the activity that we're going to see in terms of investment around smart grids and smart meter deployment eventually all shifts to the developing world. And so the question is sort of where are the countries that are going to drive that going forward? And we think that targets towards electrification is an important part of that story. So there's about 50 countries that have made some kind of pledge towards adding, towards getting it to 100% electrification. But of course, there's still, 56. There's still, of course, 1.4 billion people in the world without sufficient energy access today. So the impetus is there, of course, to do whatever you can to get to 100%. And our first point, I guess, I'd like to make is that we think that that we'll see a lot of investment in different areas going forward as we get there. But one point we ultimately want to make is that even if these countries hit their targets, I mean, just clicks on and off once in a while. I don't know if is this working at all?
I can't tell.
Suddenly I get loud and then I get quiet and then I get loud again. I'm going to try this again. Maybe just lean over, I guess. Sorry, everybody.
Maybe I'll just lean and talk like that.
Okay. So the targets essentially we think drive activity overall, but we don't think that they get you necessarily to 100% electrification on their own, which is a whole other story. But even if we just think about meeting those targets and what that economic opportunity creates, we've done some analysis around that. And the first thing we just want to say is that, as we try to understand the types of drivers of energy access and uptake, that we put out this report called Powering the Last Billion, and basically there are three factors that essentially will drive access. One, which is your income level and how you can afford to get access to energy. Two, how dense the population is where you live. And then three, and we think this is important, the historical success rate in the country of improving energy access. And we have seen a number of countries where there's been a lot of success. So basically, this is a little bit of a complicated chart, but I just wanted to show it to you to sort of show you our framing of thinking about these issues is that we kind of try to divide the world very roughly into 4 areas. So one, what we call aspiring rural people. Those are folks living on over $5.50 a day in relatively low density areas. And then what we call aspiring urban folks, which are making over $5.50 a day living in urban areas. And then what we're simply calling here poor people in countries with improving energy access rates. So maybe they make less than $5.50 a day, but the country where they live has shown success to date. And then finally, there's the roughly 350 million people that we say, which is these folks in yellow, that are at danger of being left behind because they don't fall into any of those first 3 categories overall. And then we start to think a little bit about, how would you then go about actually trying to meet these overall needs specifically as you go towards trying to hit those goals. And I guess the one thing I would note is that while there's a lot of interest and excitement, and we think a lot of activity around distributed energy, you still see within these different areas the light blue pieces, which show what we expect to be good investment. So these are areas where, frankly, it will still make the most sense, potentially economically, to meet the needs by expanding the existing grid. And by makes the most sense, I mean makes the most sense for policymakers, for the state-run utility, anybody who runs the numbers on how to actually make money on it. That's how you would want to do it. Now, you see it's different by different regions. In Southeast Asia in particular, you see a lot of purple. Obviously, more far-flung regions, islands, and things like that, which could make it better for microgrids. I would want to stop and just emphasize one point here, which is that this is essentially what we would consider a BAU scenario. So we're quite optimistic that over the next 12 years or so, you could potentially add electricity access to about 1 billion people. I know it sounds like a lot, but it could be done with all these technologies that are out there. I would also add, though, that if you want to get those last 400 million or so, that most of those people are folks who fall more into the purple microgrid kind of category. Those are the hardest to reach. Those are the ones for whom utilities, frankly, are not going to want to build that last mile of distribution, transmission, because it will not make sense given their consumption rate of electricity. So this is just a look at the amount of investment that we forecast under that scenario. And again, this is a report that we put out called Powering the Last Billion, which details this much better than I have here. But you can see that basically about half the 162 billion we think will be into grid extensions, and then you can see about 36 billion into microgrids, about 26 into solar home systems, and then about 16 billion into off-grid power generation. I would note, though, that there's still that red chunk, which is basically the other half of the challenge to get to full energy access. So I just want to pause and just say, look, the first slide I showed $300 billion a year of total global investment going into clean energy. $350 billion total is not that much money to potentially add energy access to everybody in the world. So I don't think actually the money should be the hang-up or the problem here. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of execution that has to go on around this. As all of you know, you guys are the ones actually doing this. The challenges with regulation and getting things done is always much harder. In terms of investment, I do want to just talk a little bit about where we've seen sort of the private sector going in terms of the types of investments that they've attracted. And just to explain, the blue here shows solar kits, which are solar home systems, which is what SHS stands for, and lanterns. I've certainly been intrigued, and probably some of you in the room are involved in this, by this little sort of industry that has sprung up over the last 5 to 10 years of startup companies that are very much involved in trying to facilitate energy access through solar lantern distribution, pay-as-you-go systems, and other types of activity. And I frankly think that they've always been trying to find the right model for financing. And that's a whole separate conversation, and it's an interesting one, and it's a challenge. They've raised money from Silicon Valley venture capitalists. They've raised money from impact investors. There's been investments from the development finance institutions and others. That's all gone towards their growth so far. But it's still, I'll have to say, I think it's an awkward fit in all these different types of cases. Just to note that these, you can see that more of the money has gone towards solar kits than microgrids so far. I think perhaps, just a theory, perhaps that's because the kits are often, there's actually kind of a device, you know, it's a pay-as-you-go thing, or it's whatever it is, and maybe the venture investors can get their minds around that. Microgrids are more about just going out and developing and pulling together and doing systems integration. That's as easy a kind of play for Silicon Valley or others to sort of get their heads around. By the way, that last 2019 is just really through the first month and a half of the year in terms of the investment that we've seen. So I think what actually makes more sense for a number of these startup companies is to partner with bigger companies. And we've seen a good deal more of that start to take place in the last several years. Now, part of this is because these companies themselves are very active in developing countries. If you look at some of those names on the left, EDP, EDF, these are major developers of utility scale projects in developing countries. So part of it is that that's where they're active anyway. Part of it is that they have made some pledges under the SDG 7 to add energy access and to pursue that. Part of it is that these big companies see the economic opportunity around energy access. Again, 1.4 billion potential consumers, maybe not consumers that use as much energy as I do here in Northern Virginia, but nonetheless consumers and potential new customers for their services or products. So if you look here, I think about 4 or 5 of those are microgrid partnerships, and these are some of the biggest companies in the world today that are now actively very involved in wanting to be involved in microgrid effort. Let's stop for 1 second. So just to switch gears for 1 sec and just say that as we look back on, and we start to talk a little bit about smart meters, and I'm going to finish up in just a few minutes, but the smart meter experience is an interesting one, and these are 3 U.S. utilities: Florida Power and Light, which is the one on the left. Sorry for folks in the back. But in the middle one, Southern California Edison, and the right is Pacific Gas and Electric, which, if you've been reading the news, has other issues besides smart meters. But there are a lot of potential sort of upsides for utilities involving smart meters. And we just tried to look at these 3 examples and say, where have they been able to enjoy the benefits of them? And to oversimplify this slide a little bit, or a lot, I would say, clearly smart meters have been proven very effective in allowing the utility and the consumer to understand how much energy they're using. What they've yet to be proven at as clearly is that you can move the needle on changing consumer behavior in terms of how they use their energy, and whether or not you can reprice energy in some fundamental way. Those are the red and the yellow boxes that you see in the middle. And I think, as we go forward, there is an open question about how effective that will work. I sort of caveat this by saying that our view is that this is the view from obviously, one of the world's most developed countries. In the developing country context, if you are going to expand the grid and you're going to bother to build distribution networks, you're going to add smart meters to want to understand what consumption patterns are. So you may not get all the upside, you may not get into sort of time of use rates and all that other kind of stuff, but you're still going to want to make sure that you outfit your new grid with smart meters one way or the other. All right, I'm going to finish just by talking a little bit about our view on where things have gone so far in terms of smart meter deployment and where they're going to end up ultimately. So first, how do we get to where we are in terms of deployment over the last 10 years or so? There's a lot of different things that have driven smart meter deployment, maybe going all the way back to 2008 and 2009. Those of you who are in Washington remember that the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the stimulus program, really spurred a lot of U.S. activity around smart meter deployment. But there have been other things that have also been driving activity over the years. Renewable integration in the context of the EU, including an 80% by 2020 goal for smart meters there. And China has had a similar mandate as well to add smart meters. And so that's really driven the activity. You may ask, what happened in 2015? And the answer is that basically China essentially hit their goal or came close to it. And that's why you see that purple bar drop so sharply there. Now, more recently, as we look over the last couple of years, it's been the European Union that's been more driving things because they've been trying to rush towards meeting their targets. But as you look ahead and you think about where the activity is going to go, you can see that that light blue chunk starts to get bigger. That's Central and South and Southern Asia. Of course, the purple bit, which is still East Asia, accounts for a very large portion of it. But basically, more colors of the rainbow start to come into play as you see more players get involved, and we see more distribution overall. Thinking about it in terms of, let's see, does this stop working? There we go. Thinking about this in terms of money, the high water mark, we've seen for investment in smart meters has been about $21 billion globally. And you can see again the purple bit, which is East Asia, but effectively is China. You can see how much that's jumped up. And then you can see how the European Union numbers have come up as well. One of the questions that I inquired of my analysts when I was preparing this slide is, why is there a different shape to the investment than there is to the deployment? And the answer is it's just much more expensive to do smart meters in the EU than it has been in China. Much, like they said, 4 or 5 times as expensive. So I think that's part of what's driven it. And then as you look forward, though, we actually don't expect the annual investment amount to go up much, but still, again, $20 billion a year, year on year going forward, that's no small amount of money going into smart meters specifically. And again, this isn't just, there's a larger universe, of course, of microgrids and all the other things that go into building a smart grid, but this is probably the easiest one for us to try and quantify as we do our forecasting going forward. And where does that take us? So eventually, we get to a world where about, by 2030, where we think about 80% penetration for smart meters ultimately. That's not 100%. There'll still be opportunities going forward. China accounts for a huge portion of that overall, but other parts of the region do as well. So I just would close by saying that, I hope that I've articulated the point that basically that these technologies overall are integral to development in the energy context. But the great news, of course, is that the cost of all the associated technologies have come down, as they have for smart meters as well. But as you all know, the great challenge often here is just getting out and doing all of this stuff. And the challenges that are inherent in whether it is having a single solar home system or a microgrid, we can scale up the manufacturing, we can drive down the cost, I can show you nice charts of learning rates, but at the end of the day, you can't really enjoy too many economies of scale when it comes to just getting out and doing stuff. And so in that sense, first of all, of course, salute to all of you who do this work, but second, the importance of training and facilitating, it's maybe never been more important than it is now. So with that, I just say thanks very much for this opportunity.
Thanks so much, Ethan, for that tremendous overview and really setting the stage for our discussions today. So now, complementing that fantastic view from Ethan's team of the latest market analyses, it's my pleasure to welcome our first panel to the stage, comprised of top industry experts who will share their firsthand insights on opportunities and challenges related to getting out there and doing this stuff, as Ethan suggested. Really opportunities and challenges for U.S. smart grid, mini grid, and energy storage suppliers in emerging markets in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And our panel includes Laura Olson from Tesla Energy, Arthur Jaquiu-Chomsky from SparkMeter, Kiran Kumaraswamy from Fluence, and John McDonald from GE Grid Solutions. And serving as our moderator, we have Vicki Gunderson, who is an international trade specialist at the U.S. Department of Commerce International Trade Administration. Vicki leads strategic development of global trade promotion services for the U.S. smart grid industry, while strengthening U.S. government coordination with industry leaders to inform trade policy decisions and diplomacy. She serves as the designated federal officer also to the Secretary of Commerce's Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Advisory Committee, which is a group of 35 executives that advise the Secretary on U.S. competitiveness in these key sectors. So thank you so much to all of you for being here with us today. Please come up and invite the panelists to take seats here. And Vicki, I turn it over to you to introduce your panelists.
It'll be an adventure if I can navigate the microphone, I think is what I've learned so far. Well, as they're getting settled, I'll take a moment to just thank the USAID team, Cedar, as well as it's always a pleasure to go after Ethan because he sets the stage, I think, fabulously for a conversation around cost, regional diversity, how you prioritize across a diversity of markets given limited resources but lots of opportunity, and teeing up for the practitioners to have a conversation about what the data doesn't say and what happens on the ground. So we're joined today by John McDonald. John is on my far right, your left. John is the Smart Grid Business Development Leader for GE Power Grid Solutions business. He brings 43 years of experience in the electric utility industry to his role. Prior positions in GE include Director of Technical Strategy, Policy Development for GE Digital Energy, General Manager for Marketing at GE Energy's T&D business. He serves on the board of IEEE SA. He chairs the Smart Grid Interoperability Panel. He teaches internationally. John is really just an expert here, is the top line message, and we're excited to have him. We'll go down the line. Next to him is Arthur, and I'm going to butcher your last name because we didn't have a chance to talk about it. But he'll correct everyone. Top line. So Arthur is the Chief Operating Officer of SparkMeter. He brings more than a decade of energy sector experience, both utilities and microgrids. Previously, he managed R&D projects for GCS Suite, now Energy. He later joined the U.S. nonprofit EarthSpark International, where he designed and managed the first 24/7 solar-based microgrid in Haiti. At the same time, he co-founded SparkMeter, which we heard a little bit about this morning from Matt, and hopefully he'll give us more information, but operates in 25 countries, enabling utilities to provide underserved populations with quality electricity services. Next to him is Karen Kermaswamy. Close? Good. Karen is the Vice President of Market Applications at Fluence, where he manages a team that helps customers identify applications that are attractive for energy storage development. As part of his responsibilities, he covers the globe to develop and implement Fluence's go-to-market strategies for key markets. He helps educate potential customers and partners on the benefits of energy storage and works closely with electricity industry stakeholders, NGOs, trade associations, state regulators on policy and regulatory solutions. He's testified in a number of places, including Congress and FERC. We can talk about that at the networking session because I imagine good stories there. And last to my right, we have Arthur Olson, or Lara Olson, excuse me. I've had one cup of coffee. Is Head of Business Development and Industrial Products for Tesla Energy, where she focuses on identifying and realizing opportunities to achieve Tesla's mission of accelerating the transition to sustainable energy. Prior to her position here, she served as the Regional Manager for Business Development and Policy in the Asia Pacific at Tesla, and was responsible for developing Tesla Energy's commercial and grid-scale storage business in the Asia Pacific, including the Australia project, which I know we heard about on Twitter as well as in the media over the years. Before joining Tesla, she was head of strategy at City Power and also at the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. She spent 7 years at BCG in Australia and Europe and co-founded BillCap, an energy and service company. So I am humbled to be standing next to all of them. And I thought to start the panel, we would ask each of them to provide additional context on the type of solutions that your company provides, to give some context because it's a diversity here, as well as piggybacking on how Matt has described how ITA has thought about prioritizing markets globally, and how Ethan and his team are thinking about energy access targets as a prioritization of where you might want to go next. And if each of you could talk about how you've prioritized the globe, the resources, and those challenges, and hopefully we can teach some things out and then engage everyone here, because we know we have lots of expertise in the room from financiers, government officials, suppliers, and hopefully we can have more of a conversation. So let's go, we'll start with John and then work our way back.
Okay. Just use the microphone.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you can figure out how to work it.
Is it on?
Testing.
Yeah. All right. So, good morning. Is it working?
You just have to be really close.
Testing. Yeah, very close. All right. As Vicki said, I'm John McDonald. I'm actually been working my whole career in the smart grid area, adding intelligence to the electric grid. It's been about 45 years now, actually. And I've been at GE 11 years. So I have global responsibility with the smart grid business development. What's exciting in the last 2 weeks was a new announcement that now the grid business of GE, which is about a $5 billion business, Grid Solutions, we're now part of a separate company with renewables and energy storage, okay, which makes a lot of sense. So we have renewables, energy storage, and the grid infrastructure all together, okay, under one business. Had a lot of global leadership positions, so I get around the world quite a bit. Have 5 books and over 100 papers. I write a lot. I'm also, I did my bachelor's, master's in electric power engineering at Purdue. I'm on the Strategic Research Advisory Committee at Purdue. So I'm also, in addition to GE, representing potential strategic relationships with Purdue University around the world and in this area also. I just represented IEEE is the largest professional technical organization in the world with about 425,000 members. And I was on the board of directors of IEEE, and I was president of the IEEE Power and Energy Society. I just represented IEEE in Zambia and Ghana just in November and December in a humanitarian initiative to help electrify the countries. Okay, in Zambia today, 60% of the population does not have electricity, as an example. So I spent a couple of days in Zambia. I spent 3 days in Ghana. In Ghana, it's better, 15% do not have electricity. I met with the distribution utility, the transmission utility, the generation utility, regulating, policymakers, as well as university professors and graduate students on research, okay, to help educate and help further things along. What I found in Africa, for instance, is they really want quality suppliers that deliver not the cheapest, least expensive product, but they want to make sure things work, and really want quality at a reasonable price, but not necessarily the cheapest price. The biggest thing in Africa today is a structure to create or to encourage investment. The reason we don't see the growth and more electrification is a very, very old tariff structure with respect to policy that just doesn't encourage the investment that's needed. I spent a lot of time in Latin America, recently in Uruguay, Colombia, Argentina, just recently. The biggest thing in Latin America is non-technical losses. With the 42 countries, the average non-technical losses, 17 to 20%. This is theft, and technical losses is based on the grid resistance, losses that we have in the U.S. with 3, 4, 5%. Non-technical losses are things like theft. Those drive a lot of projects in Latin America. I just saw, Ethan was speaking about smart meters, smart metering projects very much in Latin America, driven by reducing non-technical losses, because smart meters today have two-way communications and tamper detection. So if anyone tampers with a smart meter, communications goes right to the utility and says something's going on here with the meter, so you know about it right away. So what we look at around the world is what are the drivers, the business drivers, which are very different in different parts of the world, that drive not just projects, but specific technologies for products, okay? In Asia, it's interesting, Asia is very different. I've spent time in Singapore, Japan, Hong Kong. I'll be in Bangkok, Thailand next week. The reliability of the grids in Singapore, Japan, Hong Kong are the best in the world. Absolutely the best. I mean, the outage time per year is not in minutes, it's in seconds. It's so good. In China, the growth is primarily generation transmission. With all the growth, there's very little focus yet on the distribution, the end-use customer. It's mostly the growth is so great. It's looking at generation transmission, higher voltage transmission, both AC and DC, than anywhere else in the world because of the amount of energy that has to go around the country. In India, non-technical losses, again, is a big driver in trying to reduce stuff. So a couple points. Before we think about a smart grid, or before we think about adding intelligence to the grid, we can't launch off into adding new things until we make sure we have a smart grid. Smart grid before strong grid. Otherwise, we're going to purchase new things, put them in, install them, and they won't perform like we expect. And the two parts of a strong grid are communications infrastructure. Communications is the enabling technology that allows us to automate it all, and the IT infrastructure to manage data around the enterprise. There's a big emphasis today on big data, managing data, new analytics, moving from reactive maintenance to predictive maintenance, and then we'll go to prognostic and autonomous. It's very, very exciting today with machine learning and artificial intelligence, the new things that we're doing. Microgrids are much more important today than ever before. They used to be a niche technology with much more focus on resiliency because of extreme weather events and things like that. We're looking to break up a heterogeneous grid into a series of microgrids, which gives the electric utility more flexibility and dispatch. Okay. I would say, though, success is not just technology, but it's standards. Industry standards are very important today because we're putting different vendors' equipment together, and all those vendors' equipment have to talk to each other successfully and exchange information. Unless they comply with the same set of standards, it's not going to work. And policy is the strongest driver to encourage investment. That's why in these countries in Africa, I focused a lot with the policy makers. It's so important that in the United States, here I'm on the board of the GridWise Alliance here in Washington, D.C. Every year we rank the 51 public service commissions based on 3 primary criteria on how supportive is their policy to encourage investment in smart grid. And we publish that. It's called the Grid Modernization Index. So when a utility approaches GE and says, hey, we want to work with you, on smart grid, well, the first things we do is look at that in the GMI and say, well, if they're number 50 or 51, the utility may have a lot of interest, but the chances of us doing business is probably pretty slim because the rate recovery mechanism is just not there. So I'll finish with 2 things. Moving beyond the pilot phase, we need scalable technology. It can be scaled. And the second thing is we work with electric utilities on making sure they have a strategic plan and a roadmap. If they start spending money on shotgunning projects, then they're going to end up with stranded equipment that's not going to go anywhere. And you're going to have pilot projects that don't lead into anything full scale. You've got to have an overall holistic company-wide strategic plan. So when your pilot's done, you know what the next step is going to be, and you're using technology that can be scaled. And one common misperception or misconception is you can't replace non-variable generation with variable generation. I can't retire a coal-fired power plant and replace it with solar and wind. Okay?
Those are fighting words with some people, John.
I know.
And hopefully you can take that out on John or someone will as we kind of have this panel back and forth.
We can talk more about that. Okay. Yeah. But anyway, there's some other things here too, but because of time, I'll defer. Okay.
Thank you. Arthur?
Is this working? Yeah. So, yeah, first of all, let's get my name out of the way.
Yes.
There are many letters in there. Thank you. Very simple, but yeah, some evolved. Yes, a little bit about Smart Meter and our story. We started Smart Meter in 2013, being practitioners ourselves in the microgrid sector, and with the realization that there was no adequate metering solution for people like us, for microgrid practitioners. And so we had a background in utility, several members of the founding team. We had background in energy access. We had background in technology. We thought, well, maybe we're the right team to do this. So the problem that there's this really nice link between what John is saying and our story is a lot of the smart metering projects are really infrastructure projects traditionally. And so when you're a microgrid operator, or even if you are just a distribution utility with low capital, low cash flow, and a lot of quality issues, it's really difficult to put together the infrastructure needed. And so really the idea of these smart metering solutions for microgrids, it's really to have the infrastructure-led smart metering. So that's where you can really improve easily collection rates. You can have your loss monitoring, and you really unleash the potential of the business model for microgrids. So that's what we've been doing since 2013. I think that our first 4 commercial deployments were in 4 different countries and 3 different continents. And that's really where we saw that there was a need globally, there was a need all over the world to have these quality solutions. And so we developed from there, trying to be there for our partners, microgrid developers, providing solutions that the market was needing. I will go that further than John. That way we can have a lot more questions.
Great, thank you. Karen?
Sure. Thanks everyone for having us here. So quick word about Fluence. Fluence is the newest joint venture company that was started January of last year. It's a 50-50 JV between 2 established companies in this area that you might all recognize. AES Corporation, that's headquartered right here in Virginia, in Arlington, Virginia, and Siemens, this is the German industrial conglomerate. So AES and Siemens came together to establish this 50-50 JV as Fluence. I came in from the AES side of the house. AES has been in the storage business for the last 10 years. Started out with sort of very geeky engineers trying to test batteries in a utility substation in a very cool Midwestern state called Indiana. Didn't happen in New York, didn't happen in California. Actually, all of this cool stuff happened in Indiana. And so from that point on, we kind of progressed, and we are right now at about 600 to 700 megawatts of global storage megawatts that we have deployed across 16 countries. This is a global business for us. We are about 130 to 140 people spread out across the world, largely centered in Arlington, which is where we are headquartered. And we have an office in Erlangen, Germany, which is the traditional Siemens location. We announced our 3rd office location in Melbourne, Australia. Thanks to Australia for being such a great market. And so it's been fascinating in terms of watching how the energy storage industry has evolved over the years. I came into this business from sort of energy consulting and doing wholesale power markets related work at a company called ICF. And I've been in the storage world for about 4 years right now. One of the cool things about storage is that people use different words for describing this, whether you call it the bacon of the grid or whichever way you slice and dice that, but it kind of makes everything function better. And so that's one of the neat things. And what we have found in getting to the topic itself of how we have overcome the barriers and how we have expanded into the countries and regions and the global markets is that the first project that we actually did, again, when we started this business 10 years ago, was in Chile, right? It's not in the US, was not in the Europe, was actually in Chile. And so it wasn't a case where there was a direct evidence of like needing storage, right? But it was the AES footprint of a large coal plant in the northern portion of Chile. And the way the coal plant was running was extremely inefficient, right? So it was in a remote region of Chile. And for those of you that can imagine the country, it's long and skinny, long transmission lines that travel north-south, lots of mining loads in the northern portion of the country, and one single large generator that's actually going to support this in case there's a line outage or a contingency that happens on the system. And so the way the grid operator was operating the coal plant was extremely inefficient in the sense that they were holding back capacity from the most economic unit in the overall system in terms of having some spinning reserves and backup for contingency events in the grid. And so we went there and said, look, it's actually really inefficient to operate a coal plant in this manner because coal plant, you want as much of energy from it as possible. And this was a time in 2008, 2009 where market prices in Chile were like really high. I mean, of course, things have reversed right now, but this is when, gas was very expensive in Chile. And so every megawatt hours of energy is freed up from the coal plant, you're bringing the marginal cost of electricity for the consumers down because it's the most economic plant. And so we made that case and we had strong conviction in the use of battery storage that could provide the spinning reserve and the contingency replacement and letting the coal plant dispatch to its full output. And so the revenue case was complicated. Think about it. The revenue case is actually the coal plant make more money. The battery never made any money, right? And so, and the rules weren't in place in Chile at that time for the battery to actually provide this service and for the coal plant to be allowed to actually dispatch its full output. And so it took a lot of analysis, a lot of conviction in the value case for storage, a lot of perseverance on the team side to communicate all of these benefits in a very clear format with the regulators and the operator to actually bring this project to fruition, right? And so, I think that kind of sums up, in a sense, the topic of today's discussion, which is how do you overcome these barriers, right? I think it's a hallmark of like how we see the overall business of storage itself is it's such a new thing that most people are unfamiliar with it. So naturally, we live in an industry that doesn't generally reward innovation. Rather, there is actually disincentive for innovation, right? I mean, nobody ever got the Nobel Prize for making the most innovative project in the electricity sector, right? Rather, you get a call from the CFO's office if things go wrong, right? So it's actually the opposite end of that. And so I think the way we have broken these barriers, and right now we are pursuing projects in India. We just inaugurated like a month ago our first grid scale project in India. It's a 10 megawatt project that's located on the outskirts of Delhi. Again, it's a fascinating market because it's one of those extremely rare markets where the onslaught of renewables is coming in, and you have traditional coal-fired generation that's got to balance all of the renewables, right? And so, unfortunately, like the US or Europe, there's actually no gas in India, right? And so, the bridging fuel that we generally depend on for fast gas generation is just not available in India. And so, the need for flexibility is kind of ever evolving in some of these markets. And we just inaugurated a project there. We are very active in the Philippines, for instance. We already have a project there. Again, extremely interesting market. 3 different island grids operating extremely inefficiently in terms of the generation that you have and the inefficiencies in the transmission and distribution system. And we have a project in Brazil. Same deal. If you go to the northern portion of Brazil, there's a lot of heavy fuel oil burning and diesel burning plants that you actually have to run periodically because of very poor interconnection with Venezuela and some of the neighboring countries. And these happen to be one of the most rural and extremely poor states in the entire Brazil, right? And so those are all extremely interesting cases for us to use storage to actually create higher efficiencies in terms of how you operate the overall grid. And it plays emphasis on how you operate the overall grid because sometimes these inefficiencies are buried in how you operate your generation plants. Sometimes they're buried in how you operate your T&D. And so I think storage helps you do all of that. And I think the way we are thinking about it right now is looking at the fundamentals of where you need the flexibility in supply side resources, right? There is a need for flexibility. Ethan mentioned the supply side. Some of his colleagues actually talked very eloquently about the flexibility on the supply side. They make projections on flexible generation that you would require on a country level and at a regional level. So we use those type of factors to figure out where we need to go, and we try to be firm on the value proposition that storage offers. And having conviction in that value proposition then helps us push boundaries in terms of, changing the regulatory framework, getting the right set of policies for us to do this. So I'll stop there and then look forward to this discussion. Thanks.
Maya? Thanks, and thanks to USAID for both convening the event and also inviting us to participate. As Vicky mentioned, I lead our business development for the stationary side of Tesla, which means our residential batteries, our commercial industrial batteries, our utility scale batteries, and also the microgrids that go with those. Today I want to talk about prioritizing markets and which markets we prioritize when we were discussing it internally, it's not so much for us about geographical markets. We currently have over 100 microgrids in 32 countries. A lot of the, sort of the press and the focus around Tesla Energy is often on our large-scale projects, but it's these projects that we're really seeing starting to emerge in emerging markets, if you like, and it's not so much the geographical market themselves, but more the applications. So I thought I'd talk about the trends that we have been seeing up to now in those applications, and then some of the new ones that we're seeing. So maybe 2 years ago, I think if I was at this conference, many people talking to me about battery storage would talk about it's exciting, and in 5 years or 10 years' time, it'll be fascinating to see what happens. Or it's exciting, but technically they're not proven yet. And I feel like I no longer have those conversations. The conversations now are all about what battery, what's the business case, who's the off-taker, and can we get this to stack up so that we can implement it. And the applications that we've seen in microgrids up to now have sort of had three types of factors. One, that tended to be, from our perspective, smaller, so that we say less than 5 megawatt hours. It tended to be a specific application. So it might be for the purposes of diesel abatement, or it might be for the purposes of backup. But up till now, we've often seen that it's only for one application, and it's tended to involve a single party. So it might be a commercial operator or a community. And maybe to give people a feel for what that looks like, a case study might be, we've got a project in a lodge in South Africa. It's in the Kruger National Park, a very beautiful place for those that have had a chance to visit or that live near there. They've got a 3.2 megawatt hour Tesla battery system for the purposes of diesel abatement, and they've been able to reduce their diesel by 70%. Different, but the same battery for a project in Puerto Rico, Children's Hospital there, that the main purpose there is for backup. And that's definitely a trend that we're seeing. Backup in the case of weak grids, or pre or post disaster, as a way of ensuring that we've got power supply when we need it. So I think up to now, we've really seen the microgrids being a single application. That application doesn't depend on the country, it depends on what the customer needs, and tending to be relatively small at the 5 megawatt hours. A big change that we've seen this last year now is against all of those factors. So one change that we're seeing is scale. And I think this is perhaps well represented by Eskom, as people would know, the utility in South Africa that has a battery program already and is now looking at an additional 1.4 gigawatt hours. As well as then we're seeing a large number of utility scale projects coming in, emerging and developing markets for a variety of reasons. So not just one application, but with those batteries, they're looking to shift peak load, they're looking for frequency support, and they're looking to address network congestion. And so we're starting to see utility scale batteries be interesting to a range of different countries for a range of different applications. We're also starting to see the nature of microgrids change. So we've gone from a sort of a single customer and a single application to much larger whole of region or whole of island, often microgrids. A good example of this one is a microgrid in Western Samoa that's a 13.5 megawatt hours. It's a microgrid that's got a couple of purposes. One, Western Samoa has a target of 100% renewables by 2025. They're currently at 55% renewables. The part of the microgrid is to shift them up to that target. The second part is around frequency and voltage support. And also, they wanted this microgrid not just to be a single site, but to take into account the generation that's already there. They've already got solar, wind, hydro, diesel as well. They wanted to reduce their diesel, which is at 95 million litres, but also provide the other benefits. So we're starting to see now not just one site, but a whole of island application or whole of region. And we expect those two trends to continue. And now we sort of have a range of applications that might be single purpose, commercial, backup, now extending to multi-purpose, multi-site, brownfield. And that complexity and size has changed really quickly. In terms of the challenges we see, and a number of them have been mentioned already, and I think just to reiterate and maybe to give a preview of the next panel, certainly financing is one of the largest issues we see, and two aspects of that. One, the value stacking that often is needed in these more complex battery applications. it can be difficult to explain, it can be difficult to get the financiers comfortable with it. That's true in both developed and emerging markets, but certainly a major barrier. The second one being our ability to monetize some of those value streams. So it might be the case that actually frequency support is one of the key reasons that the entity wants to put the battery in, and yet there's no market for frequency support. So being able to monetize that and then convince the financiers of it is certainly something that's a challenge. The second one that we're seeing is around scale. Each of our applications has been relatively unique. The real focus now is on standardizing both sort of the product and also the approach so that we can meet the demand that's out there in terms of getting more batteries and microgrids there. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to give you the opportunity to see if there was anything you wanted to react to that anyone else said on the panel while we put it out for initial questions. If not, I have a whole bunch of my own, but thought we'd go there first. So any reactions to what other folks said? No? Questions from the audience? We'll go in the back and then here. Microphone.
Well, I'm very impressed by the presentation that you've given me. Can you tell us something about the cost of batteries now and what you anticipate will be down the line?
Cost of batteries, and if you can introduce yourself when you ask a question, that would be.
I'm Mohammed Qasim. I'm retired World Bank R&D fund for power. Absolutely disastrous project. That's another story though.
I can take a first response to that and then open up to the rest of the panel. I think Ethan from the EMEA had a great graph there that sort of showed the reductions that's happening in the battery cell pack. And I think that is a trend that we have seen and will continue to see. I think in terms of the actual application, and sometimes it can feel like I or my colleagues or other industry colleagues are trying to avoid the question, and we're really not. It really does depend, and I know that can be a frustrating answer, but it depends on both the sort of the power and the energy that you want. Some batteries in 10 minutes, many are 4 hours because they're trying to shift renewables from when the solar is produced to the key peak time. And then also it depends on the sort of the application in terms of what you're trying to incorporate into the system. So I think what we're seeing, and maybe to give reassurance to many people, is the fact that we've got, for us, 100 microgrids in place. Many of those are economic and just being put in on pure commercial grounds. Some of those have got development funding, and often that's the case because there's not a value stream for particular services they can provide, like voltage or frequency support.
Yeah, I mean, I would take a similar idea. Again, I think part of it is just like it's like asking about the price of a car, right? So, like if you said, look, what's the price of a car, right? I mean, you can buy a car ranging from like $15,000 all the way into like $500,000. Just depends on like what type of brand you want, what type of engine you want, what type of features you care about, what segment do you want. And so I think what Laura is getting to, which is how I would take it also, is that there's quite a bit of variation in terms of what you're looking at in terms of storage itself. And I think the good news is that there's a lot of public sources that are available that are actually pretty good. It wasn't the case like 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Consciously, this industry has woken up and kind of grabbed it by the horn, I would say, right? Because for a long time, the industry analysts did a pretty bad job of catching up on the renewable trend, right? So, consistently, if you look at like, say, EIA forecasts or like other publicly available forecasts of what the capital cost of wind generation is or solar generation is, the industry always kept much ahead of the forecast price, right? And so I think what we are seeing is that the industry has caught up on the battery storage side. So you could go to, say, BNEF, you could go to Lazard. Lazard actually has a great levelized cost calculator that's available out there. These are actually turning out to be very good cost estimates because they actually go to the industry, they get real data, they talk to people like us, and then they anonymize that data because of commercial sensitivity, and then they're able to put it out there. And so I think we have a high degree of confidence in using those estimates, and those estimates would do great amount of justice towards giving you the true picture of the price of the car that you want to buy, right? Because for me to say that the cost of storage is X will not give you the dimension right now, right? Because you're using energy storage for a frequency regulation application, which is a high power rating battery and sort of like a shorter duration towards an energy shifting battery, which is like a 4-hour duration battery, would be wildly different in terms of the dollar per kilowatt hour estimate, right? So I would encourage looking at those type of estimates, and again, those have become extremely good. You can, we can provide the assurance that those are actually good estimates. And they're not like 5-year-old or kind of lagging industry trends and completely out of line with like the systems that we're installing right now.
John had something.
Just a couple key points. I think one, Lara said, we have to look at the application of the energy storage. If it's instantaneous, it's more power related, which may dictate certain technologies of the energy storage, like lithium ion. If it's more longer term, more energy, power versus energy is longer term, then there may be some other chemistries that are better for that. And so there's different costs. It's hard to generalize because we have to look at what is the application, and then what do we need for that application, what's best. The other thing is, it may not just be the cost of the battery, but we call it a battery energy storage system, or BESS. There's a lot of other support equipment that's needed around the battery for an integrated system for the grid. So you need to look at, we call it balance of plant. In addition to the battery, what other things do we need to make an integrated system? So we have to look at that. And then the cost has to be looked at in terms of the business case of the application. You may have a business case, Lara gave great, all kinds of different business cases. When you look at the business case and calculate the value, or even Kieran with low-cost generation that's not being used because you have to hold it back for spinning reserve, you look at the business case, the total business case, and then you have to look at what is the cost of the energy storage with respect to that total business case of a specific application. And then, if the business case is such you can afford more expensive energy storage because the business case is very strong, whatever technology is best for that specific application.
So it's not just the price of electricity to the ratepayer. It's not just the price that you pay for generation to charge and discharge the battery. It's what's the value of all the things you're doing that add up, and that's going to be different for every utility. It's going to be different for every customer. It might be the insurance policy or the resilience policy, and knowing how you value it. Because I don't have a car, because it's cheaper to rent one from DCA and walk and take the metro. But as I'm thinking about what that value is to me, there might be a point where it tips. That's it's not the cost necessarily. It's what's the value. The next question. I'll go back there.
And my name is Daniel Jima. I'm a business analyst, also an investor. And this question is, John, I know you said you were in Ghana and Zambia. My question is, what are the attitudes of the policymakers towards the tariffs that are on these renewable energies? Are they becoming more favorable towards it? I mean, speaking to those policymakers, how would you react to the environment of renewable energy, especially in Ghana and Zambia?
Yeah, it was interesting because so much of the lack of progress has been just the tariff structure that just, as I said, didn't encourage investment at all, and it was more of a status quo continuing. So what I found, like in Ghana with the two policy-making organizations, I got them both together for a couple hours, and we talked. Not resistance to change, but it was more of, we know we need to do things differently, but we're just not sure what we need to do. Okay? So I found that's a good situation because I found willingness to change, but what's needed is education, more education, a lot of case studies on what other countries are doing, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what's best for Ghana or what's best for Zambia, and but a willingness to change. And a willingness to know that if there was change, that things would be much better and much different for the country.
Anyone else have anything to add?
And just on tariff structure, I think that a challenge that we're seeing is the different notions of customer and consumer protection. Right? And so there's a lot of this historical vision on the tariff is there obviously to protect the electricity customers, but how do you envision the future of that consumption? And so with renewables, but also with the difference with between a generation-driven distribution utility versus reliability-driven microgrids, or what drives the grid extension projects, how do you have the right tariff structures that apply to all of these situations, or how do you incentivize regulators to potentially have tariff structures that depend on the case? And I think I don't have all the answers, but that's definitely questions that are very, very important right now.
And thank you. We have one question here and two over there. So maybe we could take all three and then have the panel respond to those in our remaining minutes. Great.
Good morning to talented people up there. My name is Dan from Africa to the West. We hear a lot about these new battery technologies, but it seems like 90% of all the investment, including in these massive gigafactories in China, is going to lithium ion. Does that mean that it's a fait accompli that lithium ion is going to be the battery of the future?
So the other question, and so that piggybacks, I think, on Ethan's point that the EV market may drive the stationary. And then here.
Hi, George Taylor from U.S. State Department. With the increase in residential energy generation and storage, what opportunities of peer-to-peer energy exchanges from prosumers and micro-entrepreneurs for increasing energy access in emerging markets? Thanks.
Peer-to-peer, and then the last question.
Can come.
Go ahead.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. So my question is on finance. My name is Ken Collison from ICF, and finance has been mentioned as one of the challenges when it comes to the investments. And I'm particularly interested in sub-Saharan Africa, but examples from other developing countries are welcome as well. But generally, what business models or financing arrangements have you found that really encourage investment in such countries, and preferably models that do not place a financial burden on the utilities?
Great. So the lithium ion question, who wants to tackle that one?
Sure. Yeah, maybe I can go on all three, or maybe just two of them. So Fluence is a energy storage systems integrator, so we are agnostic to battery chemistry or technology. But that said, we think that the near term is largely skewed towards lithium ion. That's for many reasons. One, the scale of manufacturing. Ethan talked about it. Other people can talk about it. There's massive investments that are going on all over the world in terms of building up that scale. And economies of scale will drive prices down. So hands down winner. The second thing is the balance sheet of the companies that provide these battery systems globally, right? And so when we actually deliver these solutions to our customers, we want to find credit-worthy counterparts that have a solid balance sheet that can stand behind their batteries, which we can then wrap around and sell to our customers, right? And so working with a small company is fantastic, but at scale, it leads to financing issues because of the lack of creditworthiness on the supply. And so I think for those reasons, I think the near term is definitely skewed towards lithium ion as the choice technology. And I think the more I listen to this, Sarah probably can speak to this too. In many forums across the globe, we make this a technology debate. And I think the sooner we shift this into an economic debate and figure out what are the applications, how do we accelerate this, what are the policies that we need to accelerate this, the world will be a much better place. I'm going to skip the P2P exchange question. Other people can talk about it. The financing mechanism, I think that's a good question. Till date, on the developing country and the emerging market side, it's largely been equity driven, right? And so it's been on balance sheet, on companies' equities, that's been financing these projects. I personally think that the debt markets should catch up, and quite frankly, debt markets are beginning to catch up in some of the developing markets too. Usually also that when the debt markets catch up, it's a sign of maturity of a technology, right? Because equity alone can only take you so much, right? And so we are seeing some early indicators of, debt getting into project finance in some of these emerging markets. Now, bear in mind that in the developed world, there's already project finance that has been done, right? So there's already debt that's been placed in the developed markets. So Australia, US, Chile, there's projects that have been done on a project finance basis. But in the developing world, I think we're still seeing mostly on equity right now. And what can help there is really the favorable policies, right? When there's certainty in terms of the regulatory policy that a particular government chooses to impose, which then leads to certainty in the market revenues that people have, it helps the debt markets become comfortable with providing project finance, right? And so I think that's the place that we are looking at. It looks like that type of certainty is emerging in some of the developing countries, but we still have a long way to go on that.
Great. Anyone else want to comment on financing? We'll set up our other panel on technologies.
I completely agree with Kieran in terms of the financing that we're seeing and equity being the first mover there. Certainly in sub-Saharan Africa as well for commercial entities, we're very much seeing diesel abatement as the easiest financial case to stack up, where it's easy to prove that the solar and storage often is just the lower dollars per kilowatt hour than what they're paying for diesel. And in that case, it's a very straightforward case. It's the other cases where it's more at the utility scale that involves some of those other applications that we mentioned, frequency, etc. That's still harder to stack up. I think to Kieran's point, now that we've seen in developed countries, some cases with those stacking up and paying back, as is public, the large South Australian battery will pay for itself in a number of years, then I'm hoping that we'll start to see the debt markets catch up. Maybe a comment on the lithium ion as well. I think Kieran described it nicely. I think there's two other factors building on that means that lithium ion will continue to dominate the space. The first is the learning curve. So because we're seeing so much more lithium ion than other technologies go in, then it just gets better and better. And then the second part is retiring that technical risk. As mentioned 3 or 4 years ago, it's both the technical risk and the financial risk barriers that we were trying to retire. With lithium ion now pretty much demonstrated, it's just those financial barriers that we're trying to tackle, not the technical ones. And that certainly made a difference from our perspective in terms of the speed and the scale of deployment. Maybe just one comment before I pass to the rest of the team on the residential peer-to-peer question. I think that's a really interesting area that we're starting to see expand a lot. So this sort of concept, people call it different things, of virtual power plants. And do you need to have the 250 megawatts in one location, or can it be spread across 50,000 homes? Is a trend that we're seeing both in the developed and now in the emerging markets too. I think it's something we'll see a lot more over the next 2 or 3 years of how people pay for that and what those business models are. I think it's still to be determined.
Any last points, because we're out of time and I know we're already running behind, but Stephen Graham? Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to, on the financing, like the importance of data, and especially for smaller projects where data is more difficult to just finance itself. And so I think that's a good segue to the next conversation, especially like the work that Emily at LHC is doing to bring more financing to sectors like the microgrid sector. On peer-to-peer generation exchange, this is exciting. I think that right now we're seeing it at a small scale, and as everything, I think that the regulation and how it can at least not hinder what is happening is really important for scaling up and having a real impact of this kind of practices.
Let me just say on the peer-to-peer, there's been a lot of work done in the U.S. Called Transactive Energy, which is the infrastructure for peer-to-peer, driven by Pacific Northwest National Lab, one of the U.S. DOE labs, with the Gridwise Architecture Council. They have an annual Transactive Energy meeting, conference every year, typically in the northwest of the U.S., and now they're expanding around the U.S. But it's a good infrastructure for exactly what you asked about. one thing we're doing at GE and a lot of other companies are doing is with transactive energy is also looking at applications of blockchain with that also. So we've developed a number of use cases in energy, what the functional requirements are, and then looking at those functional requirements with respect to does blockchain make sense with some of these use cases. So a lot of work's being done right now. There's a number of consortiums that have been formed on blockchain that we participate in energy. A lot of work on transactive energy that keeps proceeding with PNNL and the Grid-Wise Architecture Council, and this is coming together. And I think we're getting to the point where we have a pretty good infrastructure to go forward to support what you asked about.
I think that was the perfect thing to close on because it's not an energy conference unless someone mentions blockchain. I'm waiting for someone to say smart cities, and then we'll be good to go. But if we can join and join me in thanking John and Arthur, Karen, and Lara. Thanks so much.
Emily McAteer from Odyssey Energy Solutions, and Nadia Razik-War from the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. Serving as our moderator is Nadia Sharon-Deval, who manages global energy projects for the USAID-funded CEDAR activity. Nadia is a principal clean energy finance specialist at Apt Associates, where she designs and implements energy and infrastructure programs in Latin America and Africa. Previously, Nadia worked for the Inter-American Development Bank as an energy investment officer and later as the principal coordinator for Brazil. She also served as the head of structured and project finance at Credit Agricole Bank in Brazil and was senior vice president of energy and infrastructure finance at Santander Bank. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. And Nadia, I turn it over to you to introduce your panelists.
Thank you. Okay, I think this one. Okay. Thank you so much, Michael, for the presentation, for USAID for sponsoring this event, CEDAR for organizing. It's a very instrumental event, very timely moment on emerging markets for U.S. smart grid suppliers and investors in Africa, Asia, and Latin America region. Before we start, I was just going to explain a little bit what we're going to be doing for the next hour or so on this specific panel on financing. So first of all, I'll ask each of the panelists to briefly provide a small overview of their organization and their experience in investing in smart grid, and should this be through equity or debt structures. Then I'll ask a series of targeted questions and open up then for the audience for any questions that might be requested. I'll probably do it with asking a few questions to bundle it up so that we have enough time so that everybody has an opportunity to ask their queries. And finally, I'll wrap up with a small conclusion on the key takeaways session. So with no further ado, I'll start with Bart. If you could please provide a small overview of your organization and how for smart grid comes into play.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Anybody here okay? Can you hear me in the back? Good morning, it's a great pleasure to be here at this important forum. The Asian Development Bank, just a few words on what we're about. I know that some of you, including Apt Associates, has worked with ADB, but perhaps some of you are less familiar. We're the Regional Development Bank for the Asia Pacific region. We were created 52 years ago, with the U.S. being one of the founding members. There are now 68 members across the Asia Pacific region, but also in North America and in Europe. We provide financing, knowledge services, capacity development, policy advice to about 40 countries in developing Asia and Pacific. Our headquarters is in Manila, and we have a small representation office here in Washington, D.C., which I manage, serving U.S. and Canada. Those two countries own 1/5 of ADB, explaining why we have a close relationship and office here. With regard to energy, we've done some analysis and estimate that
The needs in the power sector in developing Asia and the Pacific total some $14.7 trillion between 2016 and 2030. My mic seems to be going in and out. Is there?
I'll just the direction from my.
Okay, how's that? I won't move. So there's a massive, as you well know, there's a massive need for infrastructure investment in energy in developing Asia and Pacific. And we see energy demands in developing Asia and the Pacific doubling between now and 2030. So there's an urgent need for innovative ways to generate power in a socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable manner. And compounding this challenge is widespread energy poverty across Asia. By energy poverty, I'm referring to some 1 billion people who don't have access to electricity. So this is a massive challenge. We are contributing with our own resources and resources through co-financing with other organizations, including in some instances the World Bank. So we're putting about $10 billion a year into the energy sector in developing countries. Most of our operations in the energy sector are focused on the power subsector. So just a few of the problems that we've identified in terms of this energy challenge include inadequate capacity to meet demand, poor reliability and efficiency of power supply in some countries, and this is mainly due to outdated technologies, aging infrastructure, and the lack of investment in power infrastructure. Slow progress in renewable energy development, lapses in systematic operation and maintenance of grids, and gaps in environmental management of the sector. I would also point out weak institutional structures, capacity gaps, and a lack of policies and regulations of supporting sustainable development of the energy sector. So recent developments in smart grid technologies to us offer technical solutions that can address some of these problems I've just mentioned. Smart grid technologies are being applied across power systems in the Asia-Pacific region, including generation, transmission, distribution, services, and consumption. And the widespread development of smart grids can help developing countries in Asia and the Pacific achieve high-quality energy power service, better system reliability, and quality of service. So smart grids maximize energy use and energy savings and enable higher penetration and greater use of renewable energy sources to capture environmental benefits. One of the key features we see in smart grids is that they provide consumers and suppliers with real-time information on system performance, energy consumption, and decision-making tools that empower stakeholders in providing quality power supply and optimum usage of energy resources. For our projects that we do finance in the energy sector, we need consultants and we need to procure inputs, physical inputs. We use competitive bidding. We have a very detailed information on opportunities for U.S. companies and companies based in our other members. We will be procuring in the next several years billions of dollars worth of inputs, whether consulting or procurement. And these provide opportunities, including related to smart grids. Maybe before passing the mic, I'll just mention 3 recent examples, recent as in this month, power projects that we've approved to give you a flavor, to put some meat on the bones, if you will. We have signed an $11.5 million loan with Baikonur Solar Limited Liability Partnership. So this is in Kazakhstan, and this project will be developing solar power in Kazakhstan. And so this company is partially British owned. Another example comes from the Pacific, where we've approved a $12.2 million grant to improve the development and implementation of renewable energy projects in Tonga. And the main components of this project include installation of a battery energy storage system, development of grid-connected renewable energy generation establishment,
of a renewable-based hybrid system and mini-grids, and building of capacity and executing entities and communities to operate and maintain the assets. That's in Tonga. And finally, a third example, again, just this month, we've approved a $44 million loan with Arm Power, CJSC. This is a special purpose company owned by the Italian Renco Power and the German Siemens Project Ventures, and this is to help expand and diversify power generation sources developed by the private sector in Armenia. So the examples from Armenia and Kazakhstan are from our private sector operations. Most of our business involves providing loans to government in order to build projects in the energy sector. However, we also deal with the private sector, and under our new long-term strategic framework, we expect to be increasing not only our investments in energy, but also the share of ADB projects that are directly with the private sector, which opens new doors and possibilities to cooperate with firms in the U.S. So let me end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bart. Jimmy, if you could introduce yourself, the World Bank. I think the most important, this is just a brief presentation on the organization and specific financing for smart grid, and then we'll delve into like specific projects, okay? So your experience.
Okay. Hi, everyone. One thing that working in the World Bank and following what Bart said is that he's given a good introduction as to what the World Bank does. Well, while he's regional in terms of the Asian part, we deal with the whole world in a very similar way, lending money to both government and to the private sector. So obviously, smart technology is pretty important for us. We've been very focusing on it. We have, just on the distribution side, a portfolio right now of $4 billion in terms of lending. And a lot of the focus that we're doing here with the smart technology is seeing how can the client leapfrog in terms of where they are, how can they leapfrog into where all the developed countries are. So that's one of the areas that we're focusing on, particularly with the AMI, the microgrids, the renewables, their integration, the home solar systems. So we're looking a lot at that. There's the whole battery storage issues, where we're now really trying to focus and finance a lot of activities there on the battery side. We're leveraging some of the Clean Technology Fund, where there's over $200 million available, not just from the lending to the government, but also to the private sector. So we're trying to focus a lot on that. Myself, I was involved with an Electrobus project, which was a $500 million project helping 6 distribution companies in Brazil to improve their financial, operational, commercial systems. And the focus of that was smart systems, everything from getting the auto reclosers, your regulators, to installing the AMI systems, the telemetering, talking about distances covering over 3,000 kilometers from east to west, 2,500 kilometers from north to south. So we're dealing with things like that. And a lot of the focus was on, as John McDonald had mentioned in the earlier session, was loss reduction. Some of these distribution companies had 30 to 40% losses in terms of theft. We're really trying to focus on that aspect of things. We're talking about very sophisticated theft schemes. For example, just a side note, you'd have these smart meters where the untrained eye would not know they had been tampered with because they've had chips installed in them. So we're talking about a really sophisticated theft mechanism. But also through the project, we managed to dispel certain notions where the national, or the governments would think that the national suppliers were always cheaper. And we managed to show that the importing things and some of the foreign suppliers could actually be cheaper. So it's an incentive to keep going and investing in these countries. Moving forward in terms of how we're trying to deal with the financing aspects. What's driving this? Well, we have the NDC target. In the case of Brazil, that target is 10% energy efficiency gains by 2030. And with an urbanization rate of 86%, obviously the urban energy efficiency plays a big role here. And there's a large financing gap. As mentioned, we have trillions of dollars of need, but we only have very limited funds. So there's an underinvestment in infrastructure. And traditionally, this financing, particularly in these countries in Brazil, was done by the public sector. But more recently, with fiscal consolidation, it's almost austerity, this public financing is no longer available. So one thing we're doing now is piloting a way to unlock private sector financing, where before private sector banks were wanting up to like 100% collateral, and they charge really high interest rates. So one thing we're trying to do now is we're piloting a blend of our instruments, which is our regular financing with a deferred drawdown option. And it's called, in this case, called a pink budget, where we're using a credit enhancement tool. And through this, we're trying to be able to leverage additional funds through partial credit guarantees. So that's one of the instruments we're trying to now do to unlock these additional funds. And I'll stop there for now.
Perfect. Emily?
Great. I'm Emily from Odyssey Energy Solutions. We are a software startup launched in 2017. I should mention that we are also a grantee of Power Africa. They've been a great partner for us since the very beginning, and have funded us in 2018 and 2019. My co-founder and I launched Odyssey to streamline financing into primarily mini grids in emerging markets, so community-based small solar projects. And the idea behind this, we were project developers ourselves, and we were facing the challenge of when you're financing these small assets and you're trying to put a lot of money into these small assets, you need to do the same level of diligence that you would for a large project, but you don't have the resources to do that 100 times if you're looking at a portfolio of 100 mini grids. And so we thought software could be useful for this. And so what we built is a platform that streamlines the diligence process for the technical and financial feasibility analysis of mini grids, bundle and aggregate those into portfolios, and then send those over to investors or other types of financiers to access finance the project. The other challenge that we're solving now is when you are an investor in a large portfolio of these mini grids across many across different project operators, it's hard to get the information you need to know how your portfolio is performing. And the market is so nascent that we really need to be learning from that information. And so what Odyssey does is we pull all of the different data from all operating projects into one place, and that data might come from smart meters like Spark Meter, or from the components of the system like the smart inverters, to really show how a portfolio is performing and to start to improve on, how actuals and system performance are comparing to what was originally forecasted. The trend that we're seeing in the mini grid market to date is there's a lot of money out there in mini grids, and the challenge is figuring out how to put it to work and how to combine different types of money so that we can make these projects viable. And so a lot of what we spend our time at Odyssey doing is facilitating large-scale financing programs. We are partnered with the World Bank, with DFID, with Power Africa, with a number of the big development finance institutions that are really committed to moving money into the sector, and A, helping them move money efficiently into projects, and then B, helping them sort of align the other types of capital that need to come in alongside to get these projects off the ground. I'll stop there for now, but I can give a little bit more detail about the programs that we're running.
Thank you. Nadia?
Great. Good morning, everybody. My name is Nadia Razi Kaur. I am here from the Global Energy Group from the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. Am I cutting in and out? Closer? This is the hardest part of the morning, right? So I'm just going to talk about OPIC and how we think about actually distributed energy in general, and micro and mini grids is one component of that, and kind of where we hope to head in the future when we actually are becoming a completely new agency come October. So unlike my colleagues at the end, we actually only support private sector projects. We do not finance government projects in our current state and in our future state. But we are open in over 100 emerging markets, and our energy portfolio of commitments is actually over $10 billion. Looking at the off-grid portion of that, that's about $100 million. And it's something that we are very actively trying to move ahead and have more experience in and find new projects. So I mentioned microgrids are one element of how we look at off-grid. We see it in 4 buckets. So we look at solar home systems, commercial and industrial rooftop microgrids, and then financial intermediaries like Sun Funder, for instance, that we have supported. Most of our experience has been with solar home systems and the financial intermediaries. And we're actually currently taking a look right now at our portfolio and seeing what we can do and what we can recommend in our future to move forward with micro and mini grids, because that's an area where we see that OPIC could potentially have a lot of impact. And to date, most of those projects that we're seeing are in sub-Saharan Africa and India. So with our off-grid projects that we've done so far, really how we've seen success is in our ability to finance smaller sized projects, which actually makes us relatively unique in the DFI community. There are a few other DFIs, but OPIC really tries to go as low as we can, and I think that's something we're looking into the future, because we recognize that a lot of these projects, if they're looking for debt, need small sizes, less than $10 million, for instance. We also are trying to look at creative financing structures, so not the typical project finance structure, but other structures that might allow for more flexibility. And also looking at tenors and seeing, generally OPIC can probably be more competitive than other financiers in terms of what you can find with tenors. But the challenges that we've seen so far with microgrids and off-grid in general are, is debt the right product? When these companies are in their early growth stages, does it make sense to put in debt? And in some cases, what we've seen is that companies, we may provide debt, and then companies have to raise equity to be able to pay their debt. And that is not, that's not helpful, we recognize. So we also, as I mentioned earlier, size and scale have been challenges for us. We do have specialized programs, for instance, a program called Portfolio for Impact that looks at projects that are under $5 million. So we're trying to recognize where there are gaps in the market and where OPIC can try to fill those. What's really critical for us is looking at the management team and the track record and understanding, perhaps you're deploying your project in a new country for you, but where have you had success in other countries, and how can we look to those to inform what the prediction for your new project, what the outcomes will be. We also look at profitability of the company and what the cash flows look like. And at the end of the day, OPIC is not a concessionary financier. We have commercial terms, and we need to make sure that we need to pay back our loans. And we also, in some of these markets with micro and mini grids, there's no credit background for your customer to necessarily know what their credit scores are, their credit worthiness. So we really want to understand what assumptions are going into determining those in the particular project. We also, foreign exchange risks, we are currently a US dollar lender. We've seen situations of depreciation that have required developers to make changes in the middle, raise tariffs. It would have been quite challenging for projects, but we are committed to working with projects, recognizing that that's a reality in some of these markets. And the last challenge that for us that is potentially going away in our new iteration is that OPIC has a US nexus requirement. And what that means is in the project, in the equity portion, we need to see about 25% of the equity coming from US sources. And in some markets, that we're just not finding that. And so it's a good segue into my short description of where we're heading. But come October 1st, OPIC is actually merging with the Development Credit Authority at USAID, and we are all becoming the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. Currently, that acronym is called DFC. That may change. And the DFC is intended to be a more flexible development finance institution, a more modern development finance institution. And practically speaking, what that's doing for us is it's raising our cap from 29 billion to 60 billion. So effectively, we're doubling our capabilities. Right now, we issue long and medium-term debt financing, but we will also have the ability to provide equity into projects and do technical systems and feasibility studies. And we will also have a stronger focus on the development impact in low and low-middle income countries. So a lot of the markets where we currently work and where a lot of you are focused as well. And as we become the DFC, we are actually taking a very clear look at our distributed energy portfolio, at microgrids, at off-grids, and how can we be more flexible, provide maybe more support to new developers. How can we have more flexibility with fees that we might charge so that we aren't creating barriers for companies? And then trying to figure out with our credit committee how there might be a different way of analyzing some of these really developmental projects outside of our current credit view. So I'll stop there.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, everybody. Challenging the microphone, but I'll try my best. I think that we have a great panel because we have some experts that are more focused on statal and parastatal financing and others on private sector financing. I would just like to take a quick step back to connect the last panel to this one, because the last panel was very helpful in bringing this panel here, starting this one, because I think that the main risks for smart grids are mainly fivefold. The first one is having the enabling environment, the policy, the regulatory, in order for private investors to be attracted to a certain region or country. There's the technical barriers that Lara in the last panel discussed, and there's so much innovation, so much efficiency that is going on, that it seems that a lot of the barriers of the cost have now been overcome or are starting to be overcome. So that's a really positive point. But I'd also like to mention some other points before starting with the financing. One of them is it's always important to consider the environmental and social considerations. Some time ago, I was working in a project in Brazil. It's in the Amazon. It's a 3.3 gigawatt hydroelectric project. And there was multiple years of environmental and social studies that were done. But at the end of the day, the studies were done considering just Brazil. But when you consider the water of the river, that river connects to other countries. And so the trickling effect hindered some species of fish in this specific case, but also some environmental issues in neighboring countries. So it's always important to consider it more holistically as a region. And finally, before starting the financing, I'd just like to mention that when we talk about smart grid, it's not just the part of the generation, but also a lot of times, especially in developing countries, there's a big dependency for the transmission line and for the other components that come from the public sector. And oftentimes, contractually, there is the obligation of the public sector, of the government, to build the transmission line and so forth, or the roads, but the timing is oftentimes not the same as the construction of the generation plant. So all of these components have to be considered. But I think that the major one, and the one that attracts the most interest in terms of how to solve the nut of this 1 billion people that don't have electricity today, as well as the need to increase energy globally just because of demand until 2030, is really the financial structures and how do you unlock public and private money, as well as from donors and philanthropists. So with that, I think what I'd like to do, and it would be maybe a general question to all of you, if you could provide some example with respect to the financing, either on how was created a blended finance structure, so with some type of concessional financing or some type of TA that really was able to leverage private investment for these projects. Because I think that at the end of the day, it's very important for the audience that's here, for the targeted audience that we have, to see how the financing can be leveraged for that. It can be a specific region. It would be interesting if there's a specific example that one of you has that could discuss. And of course, there's a lot of different risks that are being mitigated when considering blended finance. It could be for FX risk. It could be for the tenor of the loan. It could be just for attracting B lenders to also work with, for example, for multilateral. So, Jimmy, maybe if you would like to start on your side, it would be interesting like with the Paracetamol, maybe with Electrobras?
That's what all of this, or the new one that I was talking about, Finbrazik, which is about a year old now, that which we're trying. And there, what we're doing is kind of a real complex scheme where we're doing a syndication of funds, where it's we've approached Caixa Econômica, which is the second largest state bank in Brazil. So we have funds from them, we have funds from the Green Climate Funds, and also trying to have commercial banks have a syndication of funding. So we have a pot of money there. At the same time, the World Bank is coming in with additional Green Climate Funds, where we can create this this partial guarantee scheme, so that Caixa can then provide guarantees to the private sector banking system, and then we will backstop Caixa Econômica so that there is more liquidity. One of the big issues that they had in terms of having this syndication scheme is that they were needing more liquidity. So this liquidity is being financed by the World Bank through our project. So the whole idea is to be able to then leverage this additional funding from the private sector. So in our case, it's a $200 million project that we're putting in money, was trying to leverage an additional $400 million in terms of debt, and then I would also leverage an additional $300 million in terms of commercial lending. So basically, when you start adding everything up, the $200 million that we're putting in will leverage around $1.3 billion of funding for, in this case, the project will be financing an efficiency project in terms of street lighting, and also for the industry energy efficiency project. So that's kind of what we're putting together.
Does anybody else have a question before we open to the audience? Is there any comments?
Another example?
Yes.
Yeah. I can talk a bit more about the work that we're doing in Nigeria, because it's about to launch and we're very excited about it. So about a year and a half, we partnered with the World Bank, who had set up a program to put $350 million into the off-grid sector in Nigeria, which is unprecedented. It's going to completely transform the mini-grid industry. It's about $150 million of that is going directly into mini-grids. And it's all results-based financing, which is really interesting. So it means that the money is dispersed when a private sector operator has proven that they have connected a customer in a rural village and are providing them power. Where we come in is that you can imagine that that is a very difficult thing to manage if you're not using technology. We're talking about many hundreds of thousands of individual connections to monitor and to disperse grant funding for. And so what we've built together with the World Bank over the past year is a platform through which projects go through a very specific diligence process, get approved for funding, and then we can automatically and remotely verify that these connections have taken place because of the technologies like smart meters that these companies are using to monitor consumption and payment levels of their customers. So it's an exciting time because it's sort of the confluence of really smart money moving into the sector, as well as smart technologies that are enabling that money to move in. And then the final piece of this is that, the World Bank is putting in $350 million into the sector, all sort of subsidy grant funding. That's another, $350 million at least that needs to come from commercial investors to complement that money. And so we have a partnership with Power Africa, and the prime contractor on that is Deloitte, to help investors sort of come in alongside that money, and to really understand the unit economics of these projects now that they have a grant component to them. And so we're using the platform, again, to sort of take all of the data that's coming from both the pre-development process as well as the operating projects, and put that in front of investors and help them really understand how these projects meet their investment thresholds, and how they can participate in what's really a transformation of an industry in Nigeria.
Okay. So we're going to open up now for questions. So anybody who has any questions in the front, Robert? Are you?
Bob Hershey, I'm a consultant. To what extent are any of you able to use the internet to get meetings together to get an economic consensus of the people funding the project? It's online.
Does anybody want to answer that question?
I would say we do 90% of our meetings via webinar. I mean, it makes it a bit easier because we're a software company, but it's pretty amazing actually, especially with internet access being better. We can do online meetings with rural operators in parts of Nigeria that we would never have been able to connect with otherwise.
Does anybody else have any questions?
George Taylor from the U.S. State Department. And I was just wanting to know, are there any finance models for emerging markets where any regular electricity tariff is too much for the customer base to pay, but that customer base could afford a pay-as-you-go plan similar to cell phones and how they would use for their cell phone use? Thanks.
Okay, we'll ask a few more questions and then
Good afternoon. My name is Jafar Danesi. I'm from Nigeria. I work with policy research. I'm particularly interested in your project in Nigeria, and I want to ask if you've done any performance review recently, and what is the result of that, and the situation. Because why I'm saying that is that I'm aware that presently the present government is not happy with what is happening in the power sector in Nigeria, and they are of the opinion that the license of the present investors may not be renewed.
sure.
My name is Daniel Dimo. I'm a business analyst and also an investor. My question is, I think you mentioned something regarding managing data that you receive from, both the field before, they go into operation. And I mean, is there an incentive for any of these institutions to collect data, after financing these companies? And how do you manage that information that you receive as far as, usage from the consumer side, or how the grids are operating? Do you manage those data information, and do you maintain it? Do you sell it? How do you, what do you do with that information?
Okay, sure.
Sorry. There we go. With regard to the question about pay-as-you-go, this is not a normal kind of investment space where ADB gets involved, but I can cite one example that might be of interest. Okay, so this comes from India, Africa. All right, there's a private company there called Simba Networks, and they've come up with a flexible metering solution, and that's allowing customers to acquire a solar home system on installment basis and to purchase energy credit using a mobile phone short message service. After paying a 10 to 30% down payment, customers decide on how much energy credit to buy, and that can be a very small amount. And each payment adds toward the final purchase price of the solar equipment. And so ADB put a $2 million equity investment into this company, Simba Networks, which helped the company scale up the sales of its off-grid pay-as-you-go solar energy solution. So it is done, although for us, this is a very small project, a $2 million investment. This is tiny for ADB, so we don't do it very frequently, but it has been done, and there are plenty of other examples out there of the development financing.
Can I jump in really fast? OPIC also provided financing for Simba, the same project. And we have actually quite a bit of experience with solar home systems and pay-as-you-go. And I hope I'm answering your question. Obviously, from a lender's perspective, we want to see the developer show us what is your customer willing to pay, what's their ability to pay, what kind of cyclical income do they have. Maybe if it's an agricultural community, there might be times during the dry season when they don't have money to pay, and so how is the developer going to demonstrate ongoing cash flows to the lenders during that kind of time? We also have seen it's really important for developers to think about how much the system is going to cost up front. You don't want it to be too expensive up front, obviously. You want to have a lower entry, a barrier to entry, but we also have seen if it's too low, then having customers that are long-term customers, people might turn on and off their systems, which actually makes it challenging for lenders. But I think from our end, we actually see a lot of PAYGO projects pretty regularly that we're looking at. A couple of Nigeria questions. So the question about monitoring projects and collecting data once they're operating, that's a big part of what we do. And a lot of that has come out of the work that Power Africa, the National Renewable Energy Labs, developed a global standard for mini-grids called the Quality Assurance Framework. And the idea is if someone like the World Bank or another development finance institution is investing or putting a lot of money into mini-grids, they want to know that what's being built is providing reliable power to customers. And with the use of smart meters and other technologies that allow you to remotely collect data, you can actually see how well a grid is operating and generate key metrics that show whether or not that grid is performing according to the Quality Assurance Framework set of guidelines. So we've got a partnership right now with African Development Bank to essentially pull all of that data into one place and create a sort of standard quality assurance framework monitoring system and dashboard so that regulators and financiers and investors can understand how their investments are performing and whether or not they are providing reliable power to the end customer.
I think just to add on to what Emily is saying, it's also typically all multilateral require specific monitoring and evaluation criteria before closing of the loan, and then there are specific milestones between construction, implementation, ramp up, and really operation of the project. There is a comparison of what was the base case of these M&Es and what actually really happened, and to understand how to remediate in some cases or improve to get to the standards that were initially approved for the financing. So, yeah. Is there any other questions? Yes.
My name is Jonathan Morgenstein with the National Renewable Energy Lab, and specifically a program we're working on, the Clean Energy Investment Accelerator, to kind of fertilize the C&I market in a number of developing countries. And so I'd like to specifically ask about those segments and kind of the degree to which these issues that you've all been talking about might be differentiated, the challenges and the ways you've been able to overcome them specifically for C&I versus large-scale utility and residential.
Mary Beth Rogers Springs. I'm with the State Department Bureau of Energy Research, and my office specifically does renewable energy and energy efficiency. Following up on something that came up at the last panel, or touched on in the last panel, which is how do you figure out the value and then in turn monetize some of the services and things that are going on. And I know one of the areas that has sort of it's come up in various contexts is data. Can you use the data as a way to show the value of the project or contribute to the value of a project? And I'd be interested to hear the panel's views on that, because I think that this is one of the areas that, with the emergence of Amazon and many other companies, this is a question. And I don't know if the gentleman who asked the question about Nigeria or somebody, maybe it was you, sir, kind of alluded to also this issue of the aggregation of data and maybe the privacy concerns that go with that, the anonymization of it. If you're going to sell the data, how does that work? So it's sort of a two-part question. Okay. Does anybody want to start on those questions?
I can touch on the C&I question. That's one of the areas that OPIC is financing projects in commercial and industrial. And what we look at specifically, really for us is the size and the number of contracts. So how many different C&I facilities are part of the project. Because we do recognize that while a lot of times the contracts are stated to be the same contract replicated for each of the different off-takers, we've in practice found that the contracts are slightly different each time, and then that brings in a whole host of more legal review needed. So that's an area that we look at carefully. And also, of course, we want to see the creditworthiness of the off-taker to make sure that ultimately the loan will be paid back. And if they are not particularly creditworthy, what sort of credit enhancements might be included in the project. And then on the data question from OPIC, we actually don't, we are governed by a lot of privacy laws, so we do not share any aggregated data outside. We have very strict confidential business information, so we can't even really talk publicly about projects that we're, like details of projects or even clients that we're working with. But internally, we do use data, especially because we look at all projects with the development lens. We aren't always looking at the IRR. We want to know who's going to be impacted, how are these people and communities going to be impacted. So for ourselves, looking at data internally, actually, I think will drive a lot of these new changes as we become the DXC, because I think the way that we value developmental impact may become enhanced.
If I may add, in terms of the thing of data, no, it's actually very important that we look at it. In fact, it's critical in some of the things. The project I was working on in Petrobras, we had to dive into the micro level data to see the effectiveness of a project. In the case of Petrobras, what was happening is we were trying to reduce losses, and this was happening at the time when Brazil was having its worst recession ever. And so, while we're plugging in some holes on one side, we're getting holes coming out on another. And so, from an overall standpoint, in our case, our losses at the beginning of the project and at the end looks the same. But we had to then dive into things to find out, well, were our interventions actually effective or not? And so we had to really look at the user level information. So it's definitely important. In terms of the privacy, yeah, obviously, nothing is going to be attributed to a specific person, everything, so we take that very seriously. But in terms of overall macro information, then we'll actually want to be public in the sense of to make sure that people have access to information to know what works, what doesn't work, and how we can improve things. So.
I think just to add on to what Jimmy was also saying with respect to data, I think it's really an instrumental tool for financiers because it really provides a pinpoint, for instance, where there is a need for an investment, and really beforehand things were done through validations of studies from governments and so forth, and it was not as specific, for instance, even just in toll roads of counting of cars, of trucks, and how many. So in this case, this is really provides a much more deeper, specific information that provides comfort at the pre-due diligence phase.
Just a comment on data in the mini grid sector. It's a big topic right now because data is so important for really proving out the sector and understanding what's driving the key economics of these projects. But there's also obviously privacy concerns, and you can imagine, if a company is using smart meters, they're collecting data on how individual households are using power and what their activities are. At Odyssey, we made the decision to take a very conservative stance on this. So we don't own any of the data that's in the platform. We're just the machinery through which the actual data owners, who are often the project operators, can share that information if they choose to with other stakeholders on the platform. And to give an example for how that's working, the African Mini Grid Developers Association has agreed with its members that they will publish publicly key performance indicators about the sector as a way to increase investor confidence in the sector. So that's facilitated by our platform, which helps project operators securely put data into the platform and share it, and know that no one will see that data unless they explicitly permission that to happen via the software platform. But that's very much, we rely on the agreements that the project operators have with the other stakeholder to make that happen.
If I could add just another side note, I think one thing from my experience in terms of the data, I don't see any problem in terms of the borrowers, they collect a lot of data. Now, one thing I'll say that there is a gap is in terms of the data analytics. It's what they do with that data. And that is, I'll say, is a big shortfall in terms of a lot of the client countries that we deal with. They collect it, they have it, and we tap into it and say, okay, do you have it? Yes. But then how do they use that to their benefit? That is something that I think they could do a lot more help with in terms of how they can improve their systems, in terms of everything.
Systems functioning is important, but I was actually gearing it a little more towards the value of the project. Does it increase the value of the project if it generates data that can be used for something else? Can you monetize that data? And you know, as part of the value of the product, that information, that consumer data, or I don't even know the full range of data that could be there. So, but I agree with you. Data analytics always seems a little bit weak, or not always as sophisticated as it could be. So I'm going to have to conclude here the questions. I think your point, just to conclude, is very good, and there are ways to monetize it beyond just the project, and that's really by the implementer itself to do it. But there's a nexus between different sectors that we all have examples on that we can definitely discuss afterwards. I'd just like to conclude by saying thank you very much to all of the panelists. I think it's very fruitful discussion on accessing financing, both from the public side and the private side. There are very innovative structures, financial structures, a little bit the bottleneck still at this stage, which needs to be addressed. There are big challenges on how to address it and to especially to scale it. We haven't yet touched about the local capital markets, but really that is one of the phases in some of the countries that are there to really improve and enhance the scalability of these projects. So thank you very much to all the panelists. I think we have a last session. So I would invite all of the panelists to sit down, and Michael will tell us the last session what it is all about.
Thank you so much to everyone, and thank you, Nadia. That was an excellent panel, fantastic insights, and thanks to everyone for those great discussion questions as well. That was very helpful. So now we are going to move, building on those two excellent panels, we're going to move into the most dynamic part of our forum today, which is an industry and partner networking session featuring 8 speakers representing countries that are investing in grid modernization and grid expansion. Also, engineering, procurement, and construction firms that are leading utility-scale projects in these markets, and U.S. government agencies that are helping U.S. firms expand sales and investment in these markets. So, let me use this one here. Go back. So, our featured speakers in this session are listed on an insert in your event program, and you can use this now to select 5 tables that you'd like to rotate to during this hour-long session, visiting those tables in any order that you would like. You'll have 10 minutes to spend at each table, where the featured speaker will share some initial insights, followed by questions and discussion in each group. We'll be running a timer on these screens to indicate when the 10 minutes is up for each rotation, and then you'll have 2 minutes to quickly move to your next selected table. And we'll also play some nice music during that 2-minute rotation to help get you moving. Then, after we've done 5 rotations to 5 different tables, I'll invite you to come back here to your seats for some very nice closing remarks. So, we are very honored, privileged, and excited to have with us today these